Dear students, I welcome you all. Today we would start the two famous poets, Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, and Thomas Wyatt. Before I begin the poems written by these poets, the poems which are prescribed for your study, I would like to tell you something in brief about these two poets. If we look at the history of English literature, we will find that no great poet was born during the 15th century England. But two important events had happened in Europe and they impacted the literary arena too. And these events, as you are all aware, they were the events called Renaissance and the Reformation. Renaissance that started from Italy spread throughout the Europe and impacted almost every literary creation. And it would be not an exaggeration to say that in 1557, the first fruits of Renaissance appeared in the form of collection of songs and sonnets that was named after its publisher. And the name of the collection, the title of the collection was Totales Miscellany. Totales Miscellany. Totell apostrophe S Miscellany Miscellany. And this was the collection of songs and sonnets that was brought out by Wyatt and Surrey. It contained more than 100 songs and sonnets which related to the theme of love, which related to the theme of beauty. As you are all aware, these were the themes which became very popular owing to the occurrence of Renaissance in Italy. Now, if we talk about the period of Thomas Wyatt, he was born in the year 1503 and died in 1542. Henry Howard, who was given the what I would say the earlhood, and therefore he came to be known as the Earl of Surrey. He was born in the year 1517 and died in the year 1547. Now, if you look at the span, you would find that Thomas Wyatt lived almost for 39 years and then Howard only for 30 years. But then the contribution that was made by these poets was immense, and therefore some of the scholars they have attributed to these two poets the same phraseology of appreciation as has been attributed to the great poet Geoffrey Chaucer. There is a critique, and the name of the critique is Patricia Thomson, and he describes Wyatt as the father of English poetry. And he says everybody who came after Wyatt, they followed him, and indirectly or directly, Everything that was being done by Shakespeare also, in a way, came from that great man. So he calls him the father of English poetry. Now, C.S. Lewis, another scholar, he says that he was the man, talking about Wyatt, he says that he was the man who can be termed as the father of the Drape Age, who can be termed as the father of the Drape Age because it was he who who enabled the people to enter 14th century, which can be called the golden age from literary point of view. Because everything, whether it was metaphysical poetry or the Puritan poetry or any other thing, including Shakespeare, they came into being in the 16th century only, and then they flourished. Now, both the poets, they belong to the court of Henry VII and were deeply influenced by the Italian Renaissance. In fact, as a matter of fact, it were they who injected a fresh line into English poetry by bringing from Italy the passionate love of Petrarch. Petrarch, as you must know, when we talk about Petrarch, he was one of the figures belonging to the Italian Renaissance, and he infused into poetry the spirit of love and beauty. Almost all the songs and the artistic creations of Petrarch, they revolved around the theme of love and beauty. Now he also invented a verse form, and that you all know was called the Petrarchan sonnet. Now, when we talk about the Petrarchan sonnet, Petrarchan sonnet has or is divided into two parts. The first 8 lines constitute the octave, and the last 6 lines make the sestet. As far as the rhyme scheme of the octave is concerned, that is A B B A A B B A, and the rhyme scheme of sestet is concerned, that is C D C C D C, and the other one is C D E C D E, and sometimes it may be different from this also. But then the rhyme scheme of the octave is fixed. Now, as far as Surrey is concerned, Surrey modified the form a little bit and introduced the English sonnet, and because it was very skillfully used by Shakespeare, in the long run it came to be known as Shakespearean sonnet also. So Shakespearean sonnet or English sonnet was introduced by Surrey. He modified that form, that is the octave and the sestet, and he divided the 14 lines into two parts. The first three quatrains, that is a stanza consisting of 4 lines, and the concluding couplet. So, in this modified form, in the Shakespearean sonnet that was introduced by Surrey, or the English sonnet that was introduced by Surrey, we do have 3 quatrains. Every quatrain consists of, as you know, 4 lines. So 4 multiplied by 3 is equal to 12, and one concluding couplet, that is 1 multiplied by 2 is equal to, this is how the total lines would be 14. As far as the rhyme scheme of the sonnet is concerned, even the rhyme scheme is different from that of the Petrarchan sonnet or the sonnet or the form that was introduced into English literature by Wyatt. As I said to you, The rhyme scheme of the octave was ABBA, ABBA, and then the rhyme scheme of the sestet differed. But then usually it used to be CDC, CDC, or CDE and CD. But then quite different from that, in the case of Saray, we find the rhyme scheme was or is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, and GG. Now this is the rhyme scheme of the Shakespearean sonnet or the English sonnet that was introduced by Saray into English poetry. Now, as I said to you, the poems of Bayat could not be published. Neither the poems of Bayat nor the poems of Saray, they could not be published during their lifetime. They were published posthumously in a collection that was named after the publisher, and the name of the collection was Totales Miscellany. You need to remember the name of the collection because sometimes they happen to ask this name. And this came out in the year 1557. Now, as we talked about earlier, that Wyatt died in the year 1542 and Surrey died in the year 1547. So it was almost a period of 15 years after the death of Bayat that his poems were published. And in the case of Surrey, it was almost a period of 10 years, a decade, that his poems came into being. Now, as I said to you, now it is the collection of songs and sonnets. So, what we will study? We will study the sonnets and the songs which have been prescribed for us. There are two sonnets, there are two lyrical poems which have been prescribed for us written by Wyatt, and the name of these poems are number one, Lo, What It Is to Love, and then the second poem is And Wilt Thou Leave Me Thus. These were the two poems which were written by Wyatt, and we begin with the poem, the second poem, that is, And Wilt Thou Leave Me Thus. Now, this is a very significant poem. I will read out the poem to you and then we will do it line by line also so that you can write the explanations comfortably well. Now, at the back of your mind or in the background, you need to remember that beauty and love constituted the theme of Renaissance, and these themes were borrowed by both the poets. This poem is not an exception of that theme. Now, in this poem, the poet is making a plea. To whom is he making a plea? He is making a plea to his to her beloved, to his beloved, and he is making appeal to him, to her. And wilt thou leave me thus? Say nay for shame, to save thee from the blame of all my grief and grame. And wilt thou leave me thus? Say nay, say nay. Let me read out the whole of the poem and then we will explain so that you can at least formulate the basic idea that or the basic theme that forms this poem. Now the second stanza, and wilt thou leave me thus, that hath loved thee so long, in wealth and woe among, woe means sorrow, and is thy heart so strong, as for to leave me thus, say nay, say nay. Nay means no. Now the third stanza, and wilt thou leave me thus, that hath given thee my heart, thee means you, never for to depart, departments leave, neither for pain nor smart. Neither means neither, neither for pain nor for smart, and wilt thou leave me thus? Say nay, say nay. And now the concluding stanza says, and wilt thou leave me thus, and have no more pity of him that loveth thee. Loveth means loves, thee means you. Alas, thy cruelty. And ultimately, the poet is fed up and he says that the beloved has been very cruel. And wilt thou love me, leave me thus? Say nay, say nay. And this is how, if you look at the stanza form, you will find that every stanza has got as many as 6 lines. And therefore, how many stanzas? How many stanzas? 4 stanzas. And all of them, in a way, are the sestet, what we call the sestet in the Petrarchan sonnet. Now, therefore, if anybody happens to ask you how many lines or what about the composition of the poem or the song, and wilt thou leave me thus, you can tell him or her that it constitutes 24 lines, which are 4 sestets. Now, in the first sestet or the verse, the poet is appealing to his lady, and what is the appeal? The appeal is not to leave him, because if she leaves him, then he will be thrown in a state of sorrow and grief. And therefore, he says, my humble request is don't leave me. If she does, she will then be responsible. This is what he says. If she leaves him, then she will be responsible for his grief or the misery that it will bring to him. That is the act of leaving her, leaving him will bring the poet a lot of miseries, and for that it will be she who will be solely responsible. And therefore he repeats the rhetorical question. The first question is the rhetorical question, and wilt thou leave me thus? Means, even it is this rhetorical question is suggestive also that it will not be wise and proper on your part to leave me in this state of grief and sorrow, because if you leave me, I will be thrown into abysmal grief. Don't do that. Now, in the second stanza, the poet says, and wilt thou leave me thus? He repeats the same line. This line has been repeated in every stanza. And wilt thou leave me thus, that hath loved thee so long, in wealth and woe among? The poet repeats his petition in the second stanza, in the second verse also. Now, he says, whether you will abandon the one who has loved her so constantly. Now, who has loved her even the time of when the times were good and when the times were woeful. And is thy heart so strong? And therefore, the poet says, have you got that much strength? Are you so strong? Will you be able to bear that cruelty that you would be leaving me in the state of grief and sorrow and would be going elsewhere? Say nay, say nay. And therefore, the poet pleads that don't leave him, that don't leave him, that don't desert him. Now, in the third stanza, which again, as I said to you, all the 4 stanzas, they are in a way sestets. It again constitutes 6 lines. Now, the poet begins with a repeated request, and what he says, let us read out the lines and then we will try to explain. And wilt thou leave me thus, that hath given thee my heart, never for to depart, neither for pain nor smart, and wilt thou leave me thus, say nay, say nay. And again, beginning with the repeated request, he says, will you leave that person who gave his heart to her and who decided to be together with her and not out of a desire to experience pain or embarrassment? He says that he decided to be with her and he decided not to be together to experience the pain or the embarrassment. Neither for pain nor smart. Smart embarrassment. He had not decided to join her company, to join her, which would result into pain and embarrassment. And wilt thou leave me thus? Say nay, say nay. And therefore the poet says, again the plea is that don't leave me, because if you leave me, I will be broken and will feel very humiliated. I will be broken and will feel very humiliated, and therefore don't leave me. Now, in the final stanza, this is the concluding stanza again in the form of a sestet. And wilt thou leave me thus, and have no more pity of him that loveth thee? Helas, thy cruelty. And wilt thou leave me thus? Say nay, say nay. And this verse is very plaintive. Plaintive means very thoughtful. And wilt thou leave me thus, and have no more pity? Now the poet says, will you not pity me? Will you not pity on my condition? Because if you leave me, I will be in a sad state. I will be in a sorrowful state. Will you leave me? You will not have any pity on me, means the poet is asking for compassion, because he says it is he who has loved her altogether. But then by line 22, means in the last two lines, because he has come to comprehend the fact that she has decided to live him, and therefore he says that I bemoan, helas thy cruelty. That is, he says, I bemoan your unkindness and brutality, because ultimately you have decided to leave me. And then the last two lines are again the repetition. These lines are the repetition in every stanza. So the poem is a beautiful expression of the notion of love and beauty that has come to stay in the Renaissance. As you are all aware that there was a shift from the theme of religion, from the theme of sacredness to love and beauty, beauty which can be enjoyed, and this is what the poet is talking about. He is making a plea to his lady love not to leave him, because if she does that, in that case, he will be thrown into deep grief, and therefore he is asking her to be compassionate towards him and not to leave him. But then the lady has decided to leave him, and therefore in the last two lines the poet bemoans that she has been very cruel, she has been very brutal, as she has decided to leave him. Now with this the poem comes to an end. Now if we'll try to analyze the poems, you will find what is happening in the poem. Now there is a refrain. It is composed of, as I said, four sestet, and it ends with a refrain, and the refrain is say nay, say nay. And this refrain, if you look at the tone of the poem, you will find that this refrain expresses the desolation and the anguish of the poet. Now, in the first stanza, the poet was making an appeal, and he was making an appeal to her, and he was telling her not to get separated from him, because in that case, not only he, but she will also be in a disadvantageous position. And he says that if she leaves him, then she will be held responsible for the distress that would be caused to him. The poet is the narrator also, and the narrator says that it will be she who will be held accountable for that. And here, basically, if you look at the poem, then you will come to learn the fact that here the poet is reminding the reader of the courtly relationship that becomes in several ways the public entities, and thereby the poet is trying to bring out the point. And what is the point? That if the lady decides to leave him, then she will be bringing disreputation to herself also. Now, in the second stanza, the poet talks about, in fact, if you look at the stanza, you will find that the poet is talking about the losses that will be beyond heart and mind. And what would be those losses? Those losses will be the loss of loyalty, and and this loss of loyalty has been conveyed by the use of the phrase wealth and woe. And because you know that at that time everything was measured in terms of finance, and therefore the poet says wealth and woe. There is, if we look at the third stanza, then you will find that there is a word warning also in the question as to whether the lady's heart can survive the impact of such a callous action. And what is the callous action? The callous action is the abandoning of the narrator. That is, whether she will be able to survive if she decides to leave the poet or leave the narrator. And then, therefore, the implication is that it may have emotional as well as physical consequences for her also, and therefore, the implication is that don't leave me. Now, in the fourth stanza, the poet has become hopeless, and this brings out the hopelessness of the poet because the lady is determined to dismiss him, to leave him, and therefore the poet has become hopeless because of the lady's attitude to dismiss him, and therefore he asserts that it is her cruelty that has destroyed him. Now the song concludes with the same repeating, with the same two lines. Here Wyatt is making use of the structure of the poem in such a way so that it communicates the social comment also. And the social comment in every stanza is conveyed in the last two concluding lines. In fact, there is no real resolution, but then there is an indication. And what is that indication? That the lady will continue to break hearts, and the narrator will continue to misplace his loyalty. Now, look at the attitude of the poet's attitude towards womanhood. And he says that the poet will continue to be loyal, will continue to misplace his loyalty because he understood that this lady will be loyal. He will continue to do this in the times to come also. and he will continuously be cheated by the lady love. Means he will continue he will continue to be cheated, means he will continue to have the broken heart because of the mischief, because of the disloyalty that the lady love will do to him. Now, if you look at even the grammatical device and the structure, that conveys a lot about the passion of the poet, and this passion has been indicated by the use of exclamation and frequent use of exclamation. It speaks of the passion, but there is no logic or conclusion even at the end. So the conclusion, the exclamation, the use of exclamation brings to the fore the passion, that the poet is passionate about love, but then he fails to reach any conclusion about the lady love. He says that he will continue to misplace his loyalty and will continue to be cheated by the lady love. And here the poem comes to an end. A very beautiful sonnet, a sonnet expressing the Italian Renaissance notion of beauty, love, and passion. And these are the three words which become very remarkable for this sonnet too. After having talked about this, I would be talking about the poem Lo What It Is to Love. And this is again, like the first one, this is again a very small poem. The poem also revolves around the theme of love and beauty, but then it consists of a warning. And what is that warning? The poem contains, means it's not a very long poem. If you look at the structure, you will find that the poem, in a way, has no idea either, but the only idea that is projected in the poem is a warning. And this warning has been given in the form of a suggestion. And the suggestion is that don't fall a victim to love. But at the same time, he conveys the feeling, and the feeling is that it is almost inevitable for everyone to fall a victim to love and suffer from it. But then he says that if a person can devise some device, can develop some device to escape from the pangs of love, it will be better for him. Otherwise, he will always suffer. And therefore, the suggestion that has been given to an individual is that the wise person is one who does not fall a victim to what we call love, because it may be anyone, either a lady or a gentleman, or maybe a person from the lower strata of the society, or a person from the upper strata of a society. All these people, they are bound to suffer. They are bound to lose in some or the other way if they fall a victim to love. But at the same time, he confesses what his admittance is, that everybody falls a victim to love and suffers. But at the same time, he says, if it could be possible that if a person had not fallen in love, by by developing some device, that would be better, because he will not be wasting much of his time that otherwise he would be wasting. So this, as I said, is a very small poem, and I have tried to summarize this poem very briefly. I hope that there is no need, because it becomes very elementary, to discuss this small poem line by line, and therefore I will not do it. I have made you listen to the basic concept of the poem. And what is the basic concept? That it is very dangerous to fall in love, but at the same time, the poet says that those people who can escape, they are very heroic. But then he says, I'm yet to come across a man who has not fallen in love. Means everybody falls in love, and therefore he says, but then it will be wise if somehow, if one could develop a device through which it could be possible for him to escape himself from this, what we call, from this notion of love. After having talked about Vayat, we would be talking about the another poet today. And the another poet, as I said, they are known as Courtly brothers because both of them belonged to the same court, number one. And number two, both of them had lived during the War of Roses, which was fought for quite a long period of time. I am not going to talk about this War of Roses in detail, but then you can read the history of Indian English literature and you would be able to learn several things about the War of Roses. When we come to the last unit, at that time, maybe I would be talking about this as to what was it and what was the impact of this event on English literature. After having talked about this, let me come to the another poem, and that poem is by Henry Howard, who was given the earlhood and he was known as the Earl of Surrey. Now, the first poem is Give Place Ye Lovers. Now, if you look at the poem, you will find that the poem revolves around the poet's lady love, and he says that his beauty is uncomparable. His beauty cannot be compared with anyone. That is, he says that her beauty is par excellence. The poet does not focus, but at the same time, you need to keep in mind that the poet does not focus simply on beauty, but he says that this beauty is in consonance. The physical beauty is in consonance with moral beauty also. Because as far as his lady love is concerned, she is morally excellent also. And therefore, from moral point of view also, she is not comparable. She is very nice. She is not very comparable, she is very nice. Now, therefore, let me let me begin the poem. Give place, ye lovers. Give place, ye lovers, here before that spent your boasts and breaks in vain. My lady's beauty passeth more. The best of yours I dare well say, than doth the sun the candlelight, or brightest day the darkest night. The poet is making beautiful comparison, and the poet says, give place, ye lovers, here before that spent your boasts and breaks in vain. The poet is making an appeal to all the lovers who have boasted about their lady love uselessly in vain. And he says that if you look at my lady love, that passes the love of all the ladies. And then he goes to the extent of making comparison and he says, I dare well say, means I can very well say, then doth the sun and the candlelight. He says that the face of my lady love is so brightening that she is more beautiful, she is more charming even than the sun and the candlelight, or brightest day, the darkest night. And she says, then all of a sudden, if we do have the brightest day in the brightest night, the day will look the brightened one and very beautiful. But then my lady love is more beautiful than even than the brightest day, even than the sun and the candlelight. And therefore he is making an appeal to all the lovers. He says that you have been boasting about your lady love in vain. It is my lady love who really deserves a place the annals of in the annals of beauty. And that too hath a troth had just as had Penelope the fair, for what she saith, ye may it trust, as it by writing sealed were, and virtues hath she many more than I with pen have skill to show. And that too hath a troth as just as had Penelope the fair. And then the poet is talking about the loyalty of that lady. For what she saith, she ye may it trust, as it was by writing sealed were. And then the poet says that she is not a hypocrite. She is not a lady who will make false promises. But then whatever she will say, she will do. And what she saith, ye may it, ye may it trust, as it by writing sealed were. She says, whatever she says may be trusted, as we can trust a stamped letter which is in the written form. In the same way, her saying can be trusted. Ye may trust as it by writing sealed were, and virtues hath she many more. And then the poet says that she is very virtuous also. Then I with pen have skill to show. And he says that I don't have that writing capability which can narrate all the virtues that she possesses. So she is more virtuous. This is what he is trying to bring out. Now, in the next stanza, I am reading it out to you and then I will explain. I could rehearse if that I would the whole effect of nature's plant when she had lost the perfect mold, the like to whom she could not paint, with wringing hands how she did cry, and what she said, know it I. I could rehearse if that I would. The poet says, I would repeat that if I could narrate the virtues or the merits that my lady love possesses, the whole effect of nature's plant when she had lost the perfect mold. The like to whom she could not paint with wringing hands, how she did cry, and what she said, I know it. Now, the poet, in brief, I would like to tell you that the poet is talking about the fact that her beauty is natural, which sometimes it becomes difficult even for the painter to paint. Because when you take recourse to painting, the naturalness disappears. And therefore, he says that the beauty that has been given to the lady love is marvelous, and it is the natural beauty, which cannot be depicted even by the wringing hands of the painters. With wringing hands, how she did cry, and what she said, I know it. That is the emotional state, the sentimental state, and the passionate state means the passions of the lady love cannot be exhibited even in the work of art. I know she wore with raging mind, her kingdom only set apart. There was no loss by love kind that could have gone so near her heart, and this was chiefly all her pain. She could not make the like again. I know she swore with raging mind, her kingdom only set apart. There was no loss by love kind that could have gone so near her heart. Now the poet is making a comparison that it will not be the logic that would appeal to her heart so much, but it would be the emotion. She would win the people by her heart and not her mind. I know she swore with raging mind, her kingdom only set apart. There was no loss by love kind. The poet talks about it that I know that she did have a raging mind, but then that raging mind, was because of the passions that raged in her heart. She was not moved either by logic or by law, but she would always be moved by the feelings of heart. Means she was very emotional. That could have gone so near her heart. It would be the emotion only that would appeal to her so much. And this was chiefly all her pain. She could not make the like again. And this was chiefly all her pain. She could not make the like again. And the poet says, since the people expected from her to be logical all the time, and she could not do that, she would believe in the appeal of the heart that was the only sorrow that she suffered from in the whole of her life. Seeth nature thus gave her the praise to be the chiefest work she wrote. In faith, methinks some better ways on your behalf might well be sought than to compare as ye have done to match the candle with the sun. Seeth nature thus gave her the praise. The poet says it is not only the human beings, but even the nature would shower praises on her. For her being the chiefest work of nature, the nature would appreciate her for her being the chiefest work of nature. In faith, methinks some better ways on your behalf might well be sought. And he says that in faith I tell you, I can seek some better ways to describe her because even nature considering her considering her the chiefest work would appreciate her, but then that was all, but then that was not enough, and therefore he says, you readers, I leave it to you to devise some ways so that her beauty, her faithfulness can be, her virtues can be fully recognized, transmitted, communicated to the people, than to compare as ye have done to match the candle with the sun. He says that even this comparison is not enough. I have compared her with the candlelight. I have compared her with the light of the sun. But then she is more passionate, she is more beautiful, she is more lovely, she is more charming, she is more impressive, she is more attractive than all these things. And therefore, he appeals to the readers and he says that I will ask you, I will request you to devise some ways to devise some ways so that to devise some ways so that so that she may be fully appreciated. She may be means her virtues may be fully recognized, her merits may be fully recognized. This is what the plea of the poet is. Now, here this poem comes to an end, and I hope that we will take up the next poem tomorrow. I stop it here. We will continue tomorrow with the last poem, and the last poem is uh, The Golden Gift the Nature Did They Give. That is the title of the poem, that is equally beautiful. We will be talking about that poem tomorrow. And what you need to do is you need to prepare the critical appreciation of all these poems. Show it to me. Try to analyze these poems on the basis of the explanation that I have given to you, on the basis of the background of the 16th century in which they were written. If you know 16th century, in 16th century literature flourished. Puritanism, as I said earlier, came into being, metaphysical poetry came into being, and then that was also almost the neoclassical poetry also almost sprouted. With this, I take your leave. Thank you so much for being with me. Bye bye. Have a nice day. Thank you so much. ध्यान रखिए बातें के बारे में चलो